On the evening of May 28, 2002, inside Texas's Huntsville Unit, Napoleon Beazley lay strapped to a gurney. At exactly 6:17 p.m., the state of Texas carried out his execution by lethal injection. He was just 25 years old, convicted of murdering a 63-year-old man in a crime that shook Tyler, Texas back in 1994. The timing was bitter. Beazley was only 17 when the crime took place. By every measure, he had seemed destined for success. A brilliant student, president of his high school senior class, a star football player admired by teachers and peers. Yet the choices he made one spring night changed the course of countless lives, including his own. Now, as he waited for the lethal drugs to flow, appeals for mercy had come from across the globe. Judges, religious leaders, even the European Union. All had argued that putting to death someone who was a teenager at the time of his crime was a step too far. But those pleas fell silent inside the chamber. The murder that brought Beazley here was chilling. John Luttig, a businessman and father of a prominent federal judge, was ambushed in his own driveway. Shot twice in the head, his life ended in seconds. His wife survived only by playing dead as Beazley fled in the family's Mercedes. It was a senseless killing, one that left behind grief and anger that no sentence could erase. For prosecutors, the case was simple: eyewitness testimony, confessions, and accomplices who later took plea deals. By 1995, Beazley was sentenced to die. For him, the years that followed became a fight for life, a battle through state and federal courts, and even before the U.S. Supreme Court, where several justices had to recuse themselves because of ties to the victim's son. But as the end came, Beazley's words carried both apology and warning. He admitted his act was not just heinous, it was senseless, and urged young people not to follow his path. He looked toward the victim's family, toward his own, and faced the chamber without fear. Unlike many others, he requested no final meal. His last statement was his attempt at peace. And at 6:17 p.m., the chemicals entered his veins. Minutes later, it was over. But to understand how a promising high school graduate became a convicted killer, how a teenager's reckless choices ended in a capital murder, why his case drew worldwide attention yet mercy never came, and how his story shaped the national debate over juvenile executions, we have to go back. Back to April 1994. Back to Tyler, Texas. Back to the very beginning of Napoleon Beazley. If you're drawn to stories of justice, betrayal, and the people who reach a point of no return, make sure to subscribe to No Way Out. This is where true crime meets truth. Real cases, real consequences, the darkest corners of human decision, broken down into tiny pieces so you can see every detail and make your own conclusions better. In the small town of Grapeland, Texas, population just over 1,400, Napoleon Beazley was everything parents hoped their children would become. Born on August 5, 1976, he grew up in a stable two-parent Christian household that valued education and community involvement. His parents worked multiple jobs to provide opportunities their son might not have had otherwise, determined to give every chance at success. The Beazley home sat in a neighborhood where families knew each other by name and children played safely in front yards until dark. Napoleon's parents maintained strict rules about homework completion before any recreational activities. Education came first, always. They attended every parent-teacher conference, every football game, every school event where their son might be recognized for his achievements. Grapeland High School became Napoleon's stage. Teachers praised his intelligence and academic performance. His classmates elected him senior class president by a margin that surprised even Napoleon himself. The election took place in early September of his senior year, and Napoleon won with 67 of the 96 possible votes. His closest competitor, Jennifer Walsh, received only 19 votes. The remaining votes were scattered among 3 other candidates who had entered the race more as a formality than with serious expectations of winning. The position of senior class president at Grapeland High carried genuine respect and responsibility that extended far beyond typical high school student government roles. The senior class president served as the student representative on the school board, attending monthly meetings where real decisions about curriculum, budget, and policy were made. Napoleon took these responsibilities seriously, preparing for meetings by reading agenda materials and consulting with his classmates about issues that affected them. His presidential duties included organizing the senior class fundraising activities that would finance their graduation celebration, senior trip, and class gift to the school. Napoleon developed a comprehensive fundraising plan that included car washes, bake sales, and a community talent show that raised more money than any previous senior class had generated. His organizational skills and ability to motivate his classmates impressed both students and faculty. The respect Napoleon commanded among his peers was evident in how they responded to his leadership. When he called student meetings, attendance was nearly perfect. When he assigned responsibilities for class projects, students completed their tasks on time and thoroughly. His natural charisma and proven track record of success made other students want to follow his lead. Principal Margaret Thompson described Napoleon as the kind of student leader who comes along once in a decade. She noted his ability to communicate effectively with both students and adults, his reliability in completing assigned tasks, and his innovative approaches to solving problems that had challenged previous student governments. Napoleon could walk into a room full of arguing teenagers and have them working together productively within 10 minutes, she recalled. His success as senior class president led to additional leadership opportunities. The Regional Student Government Association elected him to represent East Texas high schools at the State Student Leadership Conference in Austin. At this gathering of student leaders from across Texas, Napoleon participated in workshops on public speaking, project management, and civic responsibility that further developed his leadership abilities. Teachers regularly sought Napoleon's assistance with classroom management and peer tutoring. When new students enrolled at Grapeland High, guidance counselors automatically assigned Napoleon to show them around campus and help them adjust to their new environment. His patient, friendly approach made these transitions smoother for incoming students who often felt overwhelmed by changing schools. The debate team became another platform for Napoleon's intellectual abilities. As the team captain, he led Grapeland to victory in several regional competitions against schools with much larger student bodies and more resources. His ability to think quickly under pressure, construct logical arguments, and present them persuasively made him nearly unbeatable in individual competition events. Napoleon's academic achievements earned recognition from external organizations as well. The East Texas Education Consortium selected him as one of 10 outstanding high school seniors in their region. This honor came with a scholarship opportunity and an invitation to participate in a summer academic enrichment program at Stephen F. Austin State University. Local newspaper coverage of Napoleon's achievements appeared regularly throughout his senior year. The Tyler Morning Telegraph featured him in a series about exceptional students in rural East Texas schools. The article highlighted his combination of academic excellence, athletic ability, and community leadership as an example of the quality education available in small-town Texas schools. On Friday nights, crowds gathered to watch him dominate the football field, where his athletic ability earned him recognition throughout East Texas. At 6 feet tall and 180 pounds, Napoleon combined speed with intelligence, reading opposing defenses and adjusting his routes accordingly. Local newspapers featured his photograph regularly, celebrating touchdowns and tackles that helped Grapeland win games against larger schools. Napoleon could bench press 300 pounds, an impressive feat that spoke to his dedication and physical discipline. He arrived at the school weight room before classes began and stayed after practice ended. Coaches used him as an example for younger players, pointing to his work ethic as the foundation for his success. His physical strength matched his mental capabilities, creating a complete athlete that college recruiters noticed. His grades remained consistently high, earning him honor roll recognition multiple times throughout his high school career. Napoleon maintained a 3.5 GPA while participating in multiple extracurricular activities. He served on the student council, participated in academic competitions, and volunteered for community service projects that his church youth group organized. His parents emphasized the importance of making good choices and representing their family name with pride. They spoke often about their hopes for his future and their confidence in his ability to succeed. Neighbors described the Beazley household as stable and supportive, with parents actively involved in their son's activities. His mother attended every football game, sitting in the same section of the bleachers and cheering loudly for every play. His father helped with homework when needed and drove Napoleon to weekend football camps and academic competitions. Napoleon's achievements earned him consideration for various college opportunities. Football scouts from several universities had begun taking notice of his abilities, sending letters of interest and making unofficial visits to Grapeland. His academic record supported potential scholarship applications to schools throughout Texas and beyond. Guidance counselors worked with him to complete applications and prepare for interviews. The future appeared bright for this young man who seemed to embody the American dream of hard work leading to success. Yet even as Napoleon excelled in these roles, he was developing another identity that none of his teachers, classmates, or administrators suspected. The same intelligence and organizational skills that made him an exceptional student leader were beginning to serve him in activities that contradicted everything his public persona represented. He started carrying a weapon, claiming it was necessary for protection in activities his family and friends knew nothing about. More concerning, he had entered the drug trade, selling crack cocaine to earn money far beyond what part-time jobs at local businesses could provide. The transformation from honor student to drug dealer happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. Napoleon's intelligence that served him well in the classroom also made him effective in illegal activities. He understood supply and demand, calculated risks and profits, and managed relationships with customers and suppliers with the same analytical skills he applied to academic subjects. The spring of 1994 found Napoleon Beazley living increasingly complicated lives that required constant vigilance and careful planning. During school hours, he maintained his role as senior class president and star athlete with the same dedication that had earned him these positions. Teachers continued praising his academic performance, and college recruitment letters from universities across Texas arrived regularly at the Beazley home, each one reinforcing his parents' pride in their accomplished son. His mother, Dorothy Beazley, carefully filed each recruitment letter in a folder. His father, James Beazley, discussed college options with his son. Neither parent suspected that their son was simultaneously building a criminal empire that generated more money in a week than most Grapeland families earned in a month. Napoleon's involvement in drug dealing had expanded far beyond casual participation or small-scale transactions. By spring 1994, he controlled a network that extended from Grapeland through neighboring counties, with customers who relied on him for regular supplies of crack cocaine. He carried significant amounts of money, sometimes over $1,000 in cash, folded neatly in his wallet alongside his student ID card and football team photo. The financial rewards were immediate and substantial, far exceeding what his part-time jobs at the local grocery store and gas station could provide. His legitimate employment paid minimum wage for 20 hours per week, generating roughly $80 after taxes. His drug sales could produce $500 to $800 in a single weekend, money that represented genuine financial independence for a 17-year-old living in rural East Texas. This easy money created a sense of power and independence that traditional teenage employment could never match. Napoleon no longer had to ask his parents for money to take dates to movies or buy new clothes. He purchased expensive athletic shoes, gold jewelry, and electronics that impressed his classmates, while raising no suspicions from adults who assumed his success came from part-time work and generous relatives. The weapon Napoleon carried became a constant companion that accompanied him everywhere, except school grounds. The .45 caliber pistol remained hidden in his car during classes and football practice, but he retrieved it whenever he left campus for any reason. He justified its presence as necessary protection in drug-related activities, But the gun represented something more significant. A psychological shift from the clean-cut image he projected at school and in his community. The same hands that held the pistol also held the gavel during student government meetings and caught touchdown passes during Friday night games. The contradiction between these activities created a cognitive dissonance that Napoleon resolved by treating them as completely separate aspects of his existence. His friends remained largely unaware of these activities, despite spending considerable time together. The psychological pressure of maintaining these separate identities began affecting Napoleon's behavior in subtle ways that few people noticed, but several would later remember. Mrs. Henderson, his English teacher, occasionally observed moments when Napoleon seemed distracted during class discussions, staring out the window with an expression she couldn't interpret. Coach Williams noticed brief instances when Napoleon's usual focus wavered during football practice, particularly during team meetings about game strategy. His parents attributed any behavioral shifts to normal senior year stress and college preparation anxiety. When Napoleon seemed tired at breakfast, they assumed he had stayed up late studying. When he received unexpected phone calls that he answered privately, they thought college coaches were recruiting him more aggressively. When he had more spending money than his part-time jobs should have provided, they credited his careful budgeting and occasional gifts from relatives. Napoleon's academic performance remained strong throughout this period, but his priorities were subtly shifting in ways that even he didn't fully recognize. Two brothers would soon enter Napoleon's world, bringing their own complicated backgrounds and motivations that would prove tragically compatible with his evolving criminal identity. Cedric and Donald Coleman had grown up in circumstances markedly different from Napoleon's stable home environment. Their families struggled with poverty, unemployment, and limited opportunities that made illegal activities seem like reasonable alternatives to legitimate work that paid poorly and offered little advancement. The Coleman brothers had already established reputations in their community for being willing to take risks that others avoided and participate in activities that more cautious individuals would reject. Their readiness for dangerous ventures made them attractive partners for someone looking to expand his criminal activities beyond the relatively safe world of drug dealing into more aggressive crimes that required multiple participants. Cedric Coleman, the older brother at 19, possessed a fearlessness that both impressed and concerned those who knew him. He had been arrested twice for minor offenses, but had avoided serious consequences that might have deterred future criminal behavior. His younger brother Donald, 18 years old, followed his siblings' lead, while adding his own enthusiasm for risky activities that promised quick financial rewards. The combination of Napoleon's intelligence and resources with the Coleman brothers' readiness for action created a partnership that would prove more dangerous than any of them initially understood. Napoleon provided strategic thinking and financial backing. The Coleman brothers contributed muscle and willingness to escalate beyond the boundaries that Napoleon's middle-class background might have imposed on his criminal activities. As April 1994 approached, these three young men would make decisions that would destroy multiple lives and shatter entire communities. When Napoleon first met the Coleman brothers, he recognized their potential usefulness. They were willing to do things he might hesitate to attempt alone. Their partnership offered protection, additional manpower, and shared risk in ventures that were becoming increasingly bold and dangerous. The trio began working together on various illegal activities throughout the early months of 1994. Their crimes started relatively small, but gradually escalated in scope and audacity. Each successful venture built their confidence and encouraged them to attempt more ambitious undertakings. Napoleon's resources combined with the Coleman brothers' willingness to act created a dynamic that pushed all three toward increasingly risky behavior. The success of their initial collaborations made them feel invincible and above the consequences that affected ordinary criminals. This confidence would prove to be dangerously misplaced. As their partnership developed, the three began discussing bigger scores that would provide substantial financial rewards. Small-time drug dealing and petty theft no longer satisfied their appetite for quick money. They started planning crimes that would require more courage and involve greater risks. The Coleman brothers looked up to Napoleon in many ways. His academic success and athletic achievements impressed them, even as they engaged in criminal activities together. They saw him as proof that smart people could succeed in illegal enterprises just as effectively as legal ones. Napoleon found the Coleman brothers' admiration flattering and their willingness to follow his lead empowering. The combination of his intelligence and their readiness for action created a partnership that felt unstoppable. This mutual admiration would drive them toward decisions that none of them fully understood the consequences of making. By April 1994, the three had begun discussing crimes that would require weapons and direct confrontation with victims. The progression from property crimes to violent offenses represented a significant escalation that would fundamentally change the nature of their criminal partnership. Their conversations would soon turn to specific targets and detailed plans that would bring them into contact with John and Bobby Luttig, two people whose lives would be forever changed by this dangerous alliance. Before we continue, a quick reminder. If you find value in stories like this, where choices, justice, and tragedy collide, please subscribe to No Way Out and turn on notifications. And this isn't just about watching. Share this video with others, especially the young people in your life. Napoleon Beazley was a brilliant student, an athlete, a leader, yet one reckless decision destroyed multiple families and ended his own life. Stories like his need to be told so others don't walk the same path. For the older generation, parents, mentors, teachers, please look out for the young people around you. Guide them, protect them, and remind them that one bad choice can change everything. Together, we can make sure that lessons written in blood aren't repeated in the next generation. Let's continue. John Luttig embodied the values of hard work and community service that defined his generation. Born in 1931, he grew up during the Great Depression, learning early that success required dedication, integrity, and perseverance. These lessons shaped his approach to both business and family throughout his 63 years of life. After completing his education, John entered the business world with determination to build something lasting. He established himself in Tyler, Texas, where he developed a reputation for honest dealing and reliable service. His business acumen and ethical approach earned him respect throughout the East Texas business community. John's success in business provided him the means to support his family comfortably and contribute meaningfully to his community. He believed strongly in giving back to the place that had supported his endeavors. Local organizations could count on John Luttig for both financial support and personal involvement in worthwhile causes. His marriage to Bobby created a partnership that strengthened both of their commitments to family and community. Together, they raised children who reflected their values of education, service, and personal responsibility. The Luttig household emphasized the importance of making positive contributions to society. John's proudest achievement was watching his son Michael succeed in law school and begin building what would become a distinguished legal career. Michael's appointment to the federal bench represented the fulfillment of dreams John had nurtured throughout his son's education. The family's investment in education and public service had produced remarkable results. John's pride in Michael's accomplishments was evident to everyone who knew the family. He followed his son's cases with interest and understanding, having developed considerable legal knowledge through years of business dealings. Their conversations about law and justice revealed a deep mutual respect and shared commitment to ethical behavior. Michael's position as a federal judge on the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals represented the pinnacle of legal achievement. His opinions were studied by law students and cited by other courts. Legal scholars recognized his intellect and his careful approach to constitutional interpretation. The respect he commanded in judicial circles reflected the values John had instilled. The relationship between father and son remained close despite the demands of Michael's judicial responsibilities. They spoke regularly, sharing insights about business, law, and family matters. John's practical wisdom complemented Michael's legal expertise, creating conversations that enriched both men's understanding of their respective fields. John understood the significance of Michael's position and the responsibilities that came with lifetime tenure on the federal bench. He took pride in his son's commitment to fair and impartial justice, knowing that Michael's decisions would affect countless lives and potentially shape American law for generations. Michael's success had also brought connections throughout the highest levels of American government and law. Supreme Court justices knew and respected him. His potential for future advancement, possibly to the Supreme Court itself, was discussed in political and legal circles. John witnessed these developments with quiet satisfaction and continuing pride. The Luttig family home in Tyler reflected John's success and their commitment to stability. Located in an upscale neighborhood, the house provided security and comfort that John had worked decades to achieve. The driveway where John parked his Mercedes represented the rewards of ethical business practices and careful financial management. At 63, John looked forward to enjoying the fruits of his labor while continuing his community involvement. His business interests remained active, but he had begun thinking about legacy and the values he wanted to pass on to future generations. The respect he had earned in Tyler was a source of pride and satisfaction. John maintained physical fitness and mental sharpness that belied his age. He remained actively involved in business decisions and community affairs, contributing his experience and wisdom to various causes. His presence at community events was expected and appreciated by those who valued his counsel. Bobby shared John's commitment to community service and family values. Their marriage had weathered the challenges that test long-term relationships, emerging stronger and more unified. Together, they had created a life that balanced personal success with meaningful contributions to others. Neither John nor Bobby could have imagined that their comfortable, well-ordered life would soon intersect with the dangerous world that Napoleon Beazley and the Coleman brothers inhabited. The discussions between Napoleon Beazley and the Coleman brothers took on an increasingly dangerous tone as April 1994 progressed. What had started as casual talk about easy money evolved into specific planning for violent crimes. The three young men fed off each other's bravado, each trying to appear more fearless than the others. Napoleon's intelligence made him the natural leader in their planning sessions. He could analyze potential targets, consider risks, and develop strategies that the Coleman brothers found impressive. His academic success translated into criminal planning abilities that enhanced their confidence in undertaking more serious crimes. The Coleman brothers contributed enthusiasm and readiness for action that complemented Napoleon's strategic thinking. They had fewer reservations about violence and less concern about long-term consequences. Their willingness to act provided the energy that turned Napoleon's plans into potential reality. Money remained the primary motivation for their criminal activities, but other factors were also emerging. The excitement of dangerous activities, the sense of power that came from carrying weapons, and the thrill of outsmarting law enforcement all contributed to their escalating behavior. Napoleon had expressed curiosity about what it would feel like to kill someone. This wasn't merely criminal planning, it suggested psychological preparation for the ultimate violent act. The Coleman brothers listened to such statements without discouraging or challenging them. Their conversations revealed a dangerous disconnection from the reality of violence and its consequences. They discussed potential victims as targets rather than human beings with families, dreams, and contributions to their communities. This dehumanization made their planning easier and their eventual actions possible. The three had begun conducting surveillance of potential targets, looking for opportunities that would provide substantial rewards with manageable risks. They studied the routines of wealthy individuals, noting when people were vulnerable and what valuable possessions might be worth stealing. Napoleon's fascination with luxury cars, particularly Mercedes vehicles, influenced their target selection. He had expressed a desire to drive such a car to school, impressing classmates with stolen property. This combination of practical criminal goals with adolescent status seeking would prove significant. Their planning sessions became more detailed and specific as April progressed. They discussed weapons, escape routes, and methods for avoiding identification. The sophistication of their planning reflected Napoleon's intelligence while revealing the serious nature of their intentions. By mid-April, their conversations had moved beyond theoretical discussion to practical preparation. They had identified potential targets and begun final preparations for crimes that would change multiple lives forever. The momentum of their partnership was carrying them toward violence that none of them fully comprehended. The evening of April 19, 1994, would transform their criminal fantasies into deadly reality. The evening began like countless others in Tyler, Texas. John and Bobby Luttig had spent a pleasant evening together, maintaining the comfortable routines that had defined their long marriage. Neither suspected that three young men were preparing to shatter their peaceful existence forever. Napoleon Beazley, Cedric Coleman, and Donald Coleman drove through Tyler in a red Ford Probe, searching for the perfect target. Their previous discussions had focused on stealing a Mercedes, and they were determined to find one that evening. The combination of valuable property and Napoleon's desire to impress his classmates drove their search. The trio had initially attempted to steal a different Mercedes earlier in the evening, but their first effort had failed. Rather than abandoning their plans, they decided to continue searching Tyler's upscale neighborhoods for another opportunity. Their persistence would prove tragically successful. When they spotted John Luttig's 10-year-old Mercedes in traffic, the three young men began following the vehicle. John was driving with Bobby as his passenger, completely unaware that they had attracted the attention of dangerous predators. The Luttigs were simply returning home from an ordinary evening out. During the pursuit, Napoleon made chilling statements about his intentions. He expressed excitement about the approaching confrontation and curiosity about what it would feel like to kill someone. These weren't impulsive comments, but revealed preparation for violence that went beyond simple theft. The Luttigs' Mercedes turned into their own driveway, followed immediately by their pursuers. What should have been the safety of home became the location where their ordeal would begin. The familiar surroundings that represented decades of hard work and careful planning became the setting for unimaginable violence. Napoleon Beazley exited the Ford Probe and approached the Luttig vehicle with a .45 caliber pistol. Records indicate that he was shouting and had removed his shirt during the approach. The chaos and aggression he displayed terrorized the elderly couple, who found themselves trapped in their own driveway. John Luttig, facing an armed teenager demanding his car, complied with the demands. His 63 years of life experience had taught him that material possessions weren't worth risking his life or his wife's safety. He was prepared to surrender the Mercedes to protect Bobby and himself from harm. Napoleon's actions went far beyond what was necessary for a simple carjacking. He shot John Luttig once, then turned his weapon toward Bobby. When his shot missed her, she fell to the garage floor and remained motionless, hoping to convince her attackers that she was dead. This quick thinking saved her life. Rather than fleeing with the stolen vehicle, Napoleon returned to John Luttig and fired a second shot at close range into his head. This execution-style killing demonstrated that his motivations extended beyond theft into the realm of cold-blooded murder. Bobby Luttig's survival provided law enforcement with crucial eyewitness testimony that would prove invaluable in solving the case. The Tyler Police Department responded immediately to reports of the shooting. Officers arrived to find John Luttig dead in his driveway and Bobby traumatized, but able to provide initial information about the attackers. The scene revealed clear evidence of a violent carjacking that had escalated to murder. Detective work began immediately, with investigators collecting physical evidence from the crime scene and conducting interviews with neighbors who might have witnessed the attack or seen the perpetrator's vehicle. The red Ford Probe that witnesses had observed became a key piece of information in identifying the suspects. The stolen Mercedes provided another investigative lead. Law enforcement agencies throughout East Texas received alerts to watch for the distinctive vehicle, knowing that the perpetrators might attempt to sell it or use it in additional crimes. The car's recovery would prove crucial in building the case against the three suspects. Within days of the murder, investigators had developed leads pointing toward Napoleon Beazley and the Coleman brothers. The red Ford probe was traced to connections with the suspects, and witness descriptions began matching known individuals in the Tyler area. The investigation was moving quickly toward arrests. Napoleon's attempt to use the stolen Mercedes to attend school created additional evidence linking him to the crime. His desire to impress classmates with the luxury vehicle provided investigators with multiple witnesses who could testify about his possession of stolen property immediately after the murder. Physical evidence from the crime scene, witness testimony, and the recovery of stolen property created a strong case that prosecutors could present to a jury. The investigation had moved efficiently from crime scene analysis to suspect identification to evidence collection that would support criminal charges. The arrests of Napoleon Beazley and the Coleman brothers came quickly after the crime. All three were taken into custody and faced charges related to John Luttig's murder and the theft of his vehicle. The case would now move from the investigative phase into the complex legal proceedings that would determine the fate of three young men whose violent actions had destroyed multiple lives. Federal prosecutors charged all three with carjacking, resulting in death, a crime that carried potential death penalty consequences. However, Napoleon's age at the time of the crime, just 17 years old, made him ineligible for federal death penalty prosecution. This legal distinction would prove crucial in determining his eventual fate. The Coleman brothers, both over 18 at the time of the crime, faced potential federal death sentences. However, they quickly recognized the benefits of cooperation with prosecutors. Their willingness to testify against Napoleon in exchange for plea agreements would significantly reduce their sentences while providing crucial evidence for his prosecution. Cedric and Donald Coleman each pleaded guilty to federal carjacking charges and received sentences of 43.75 and 40 years in federal prison respectively. These substantial sentences reflected the seriousness of their crimes while rewarding their cooperation with prosecutors in building the case against Napoleon Beazley. State prosecutors in Smith County, Texas, pursued capital murder charges against all three defendants. Unlike federal court, state law allowed for death penalty prosecution of defendants who were 17 years old at the time of their crimes. This meant Napoleon faced potential execution while his older accomplices might receive life sentences. The Coleman brothers also pleaded guilty to state capital murder charges and received life sentences with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Their cooperation with prosecutors earned them sentences that, while severe, offered eventual hope of release. Their testimony would prove crucial in Napoleon's trial. Napoleon Beazley faced the most serious consequences of the three participants. His age made him ineligible for federal death penalty prosecution, but state law allowed for his execution. His refusal to accept plea agreements and his status as the trigger man made him the primary target for prosecutors seeking the ultimate penalty. The legal strategy for Napoleon's defense faced significant challenges. The physical evidence, witness testimony, and the Coleman brothers' cooperation created a strong prosecution case. Defense attorneys would need to focus on mitigating factors, particularly Napoleon's age and background, to avoid a death sentence. Prosecutors viewed Napoleon as the leader and most culpable participant in John Luttig's murder. His intelligence, planning abilities, and the deliberate nature of his actions made him the ideal candidate for death penalty prosecution. The victim's prominence added additional pressure for the maximum penalty. The different outcomes for the three co-defendants would later fuel arguments about fairness and proportionality in death penalty cases. Critics would point out that the actual killer faced execution while his accomplices received life sentences with parole possibilities, raising questions about consistency in capital punishment. As the legal proceedings moved forward, the case would become much more than a simple murder trial, involving issues of juvenile justice, racial bias, and the role of victim impact in determining sentences. Smith County District Attorney Jack Skeen faced the challenge of prosecuting a case that had captured statewide attention while ensuring that justice was served for John Luttig's murder. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of Cedric and Donald Coleman, whose plea agreements required them to provide truthful testimony about the planning and execution of John Luttig's murder. Their detailed accounts of Napoleon's statements and actions would prove crucial in establishing his culpability and premeditation. Bobby Luttig's eyewitness testimony provided powerful evidence about the actual crime. Her ability to identify Napoleon Beazley as the shooter and describe the deliberate nature of his actions gave prosecutors compelling testimony from someone who had witnessed her husband's murder firsthand. Physical evidence collected from the crime scene supported the witness testimony and established the sequence of events that led to John Luttig's death. The .45 caliber weapon used in the murder, the stolen Mercedes, and other materials linked Napoleon directly to the crime in ways that would be difficult for defense attorneys to challenge. The victim impact testimony from Michael Luttig and other family members provided emotional context for the jury to understand the broader consequences of Napoleon's actions. The loss of John Luttig affected not only his immediate family, but also the community that had benefited from his business leadership and civic involvement. Defense attorneys faced the difficult task of saving Napoleon's life while acknowledging his guilt in John Luttig's murder. Their strategy focused on his age, background, and potential for rehabilitation, rather than challenging the evidence of his involvement in the crime. The defense emphasized Napoleon's accomplishments in school and athletics, arguing that his crime represented an aberration rather than his true character. Teachers, coaches, and community members testified about his positive qualities and potential for contributing to society if given the opportunity. Mental health experts testified about adolescent brain development and the reduced culpability that should be associated with crimes committed by minors. On March 17, 1995, the jury in Napoleon Beazley's capital murder trial returned with verdicts that would determine his fate. The deliberations had been thorough, with jurors carefully considering the evidence presented by both prosecution and defense attorneys over the course of the 2-week trial. The guilt phase verdict came first: guilty of capital murder. The jury had concluded that Napoleon Beazley had intentionally killed John Luttig during the commission of a robbery, meeting the legal requirements for Texas's most serious criminal charge. This verdict was hardly surprising, given the strength of the evidence and witness testimony. The penalty phase presented a more complex decision for the jury. They were required to consider aggravating factors that might justify a death sentence against mitigating factors that might warrant life imprisonment. Napoleon's age at the time of the crime, just 3.5 months from his 18th birthday, represented the most significant mitigating factor. Defense attorneys had argued passionately that executing someone for a crime committed at age 17 violated evolving standards of decency and failed to account for the reduced culpability of juvenile offenders. They presented evidence about brain development and decision-making capacity that would later become central to national juvenile justice debates. The prosecution countered that Napoleon's age did not excuse the calculated brutality of his actions. The jury's penalty phase verdict was death. They had concluded that the aggravating factors in Napoleon's case outweighed the mitigating factors, including his age. This decision reflected their judgment that some crimes are so heinous that even youthful offenders should face execution. Judge Cynthia Stevens Kent, who had presided over the trial, formally sentenced Napoleon Beazley to death by lethal injection. This sentence would later become controversial when Judge Kent herself would advocate for commutation. But at the time, she implemented the jury's decision according to Texas law. The death sentence began Napoleon's journey through the complex appeals process that characterizes capital punishment cases. His attorneys would have multiple opportunities to challenge both his conviction and sentence through state and federal courts, a process that would ultimately take 7 years to complete. Texas death row at the Huntsville Unit became Napoleon Beazley's new home in 1995. At 18 years old, he was among the youngest inmates in a system designed for the state's most serious criminals. The transition from honor student and star athlete to condemned prisoner represented a dramatic fall that few could have predicted. Life on death row followed strict routines designed for maximum security and minimal human contact. Napoleon spent 22 hours daily in a small cell, with limited opportunities for exercise, reading, or interaction with other inmates. This isolation provided time for reflection on the choices that had brought him to this place. Napoleon's intelligence served him well in navigating the complex legal appeals process. He read extensively about criminal law, worked closely with his attorneys, and maintained correspondence with supporters who believed his death sentence was inappropriate for someone who had committed his crime as a juvenile. The first level of appeals focused on state court challenges to both his conviction and death sentence. Napoleon's attorneys argued that his trial had been fundamentally unfair due to prosecutorial misconduct, ineffective assistance of counsel, and racial bias in jury selection. These claims would be thoroughly reviewed by Texas appellate courts. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals denied relief on Napoleon's initial appeal, affirming both his conviction and death sentence. The court found that the evidence supported the jury's verdict and that the trial had been conducted fairly according to Texas law. This decision moved the case toward federal court review. Federal habeas corpus proceedings provided another opportunity to challenge Napoleon's death sentence. His attorneys argued that executing someone for a crime committed at age 17 violated the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, particularly in light of evolving national standards regarding juvenile offenders. The case attracted attention from organizations opposed to capital punishment, particularly the execution of juvenile offenders. Amnesty International, the American Civil Liberties Union, and various religious groups filed briefs supporting Napoleon's appeals and arguing that international law prohibited executing juvenile offenders. Napoleon's case occurred during a period when legal scholars and practitioners were increasingly questioning the appropriateness of death sentences for juvenile offenders. Scientific research about adolescent brain development and decision-making capacity provided new arguments for treating young offenders differently from adults. The appeals process revealed the complexity of capital punishment in cases involving juvenile offenders. Courts struggled to balance the seriousness of Napoleon's crime against arguments that his age at the time reduced his culpability and made execution inappropriate as punishment. As his appeals worked through the courts, Napoleon continued his education and maintained correspondence with people interested in his case. His articulate writing and thoughtful analysis of his situation impressed many who believed he demonstrated capacity for rehabilitation that execution would eliminate. The identity of Napoleon's victim created unprecedented complications for the American justice system. John Luttig wasn't simply a businessman. He was the father of federal Judge J. Michael Luttig, one of the most respected jurists in the country and a potential Supreme Court nominee. This family connection would create conflicts of interest that reached the highest levels of government. Judge Michael Luttig's prominence in conservative legal circles meant that he had professional relationships with numerous officials who might be involved in reviewing Napoleon's appeals. His service as a law clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia and his role in the confirmation processes of Justices Clarence Thomas and David Souter created personal connections that would require careful consideration. The most significant complication emerged when Napoleon's case reached the U.S. Supreme Court. 3 justices, Antonin Scalia, Clarence Thomas, and David Souter, recused themselves from participating in any decisions related to the case due to their professional relationships with Judge Luttig. This reduced the court from 9 justices to 6 for Napoleon's case. Justice Scalia's recusal was based on Judge Luttig's service as his law clerk. creating a mentor-student relationship that made impartial judgment impossible. Justice Thomas recused himself because Judge Luttig had assisted in his Senate confirmation process. Justice Souter's recusal reflected Judge Luttig's role in his own confirmation proceedings. The reduction of the Supreme Court to 6 justices created the possibility of tie votes that would leave lower court decisions undisturbed. This meant that Napoleon's fate might be determined not by the full court's judgment, but by the practical consequences of judicial recusals based on professional relationships. Legal experts debated whether the recusals were necessary or whether they created an unfair disadvantage for Napoleon's appeals. Some argued that the justices' professional relationships with Judge Luttig didn't require recusal, while others praised their decision to avoid any appearance of bias or conflict of interest. Judge Luttig himself maintained appropriate distance from the legal proceedings while making clear his support for the death penalty in his father's case. His victim impact testimony during the penalty phase had provided powerful evidence about the consequences of Napoleon's actions for the Luttig family and community. The complications created by Judge Luttig's prominence extended beyond the Supreme Court to other levels of the federal judiciary. Judges who had professional relationships with him faced questions about whether they should recuse themselves from various proceedings in Napoleon's case. As Napoleon's appeals moved through the courts, these complications would become increasingly significant in determining his ultimate fate. On August 13, 2001, the United States Supreme Court faced an unprecedented situation when reviewing Napoleon Beazley's request for a stay of execution. With 3 justices recused due to their professional relationships with victim's son, Judge Michael Luttig, only 6 justices remained to consider the case, creating the possibility of a tie vote. Justice John Paul Stevens, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and Stephen Breyer indicated their support for granting Napoleon a stay of execution. These 3 justices were known for their skepticism about capital punishment generally and juvenile execution specifically. Their votes reflected growing concerns about the constitutionality of executing minors. 3 other justices, Chief Justice William Rehnquist and Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Anthony Kennedy, voted against granting the stay. Their position supported the lower court's determination that Napoleon's execution could proceed under existing law, despite his age at the time of the crime. The 3-3 tie vote meant that the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals' decision denying Napoleon relief would stand. Under Supreme Court procedures, tie votes result in affirmance of lower court rulings without creating binding precedent. Napoleon's request for a stay was effectively denied. As May 28, 2002 approached, Napoleon Beazley's case had become an international symbol of America's approach to juvenile justice and capital punishment. News organizations from around the world descended on Texas to cover what many viewed as a test of America's commitment to human rights principles it advocated globally. European television networks, newspapers, and radio stations provided extensive coverage of Napoleon's case, often presenting it as evidence of American hypocrisy in human rights advocacy. The contrast between America's criticism of other nations' human rights violations and its own practice of executing juvenile offenders created diplomatic tensions with traditional allies. The Vatican issued a statement opposing Napoleon's execution, joining Pope John Paul II's broader campaign against capital punishment. Catholic organizations throughout the United States organized prayer services and advocacy efforts supporting clemency, emphasizing religious teachings about redemption and the sanctity of human life. As execution day arrived, protesters gathered outside the prison where Napoleon would die, while supporters held vigils in cities across the United States and around the world. On May 28, 2002, Napoleon Beazley was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville Unit in Texas, becoming one of the last juvenile offenders to be executed in the United States. His death marked the end of a legal battle that had lasted 7 years and attracted unprecedented international attention to America's practice of executing individuals for crimes committed as minors. Unlike many death row inmates who request elaborate final meals, Napoleon did not request a last meal. perhaps reflecting his desire to treat this day with solemnity rather than ritual. He spent much of the day composing his final statement on lined loose-leaf paper, choosing to write his thoughts rather than speak them from the gurney. Napoleon's final statement reflected the intelligence and thoughtfulness that had characterized his communications throughout his time on death row. He acknowledged the heinous nature of his crime, while arguing that the person who committed the murder was no longer the same person facing execution. His words demonstrated both accountability for his actions and criticism of a system he believed offered no possibility of redemption. Napoleon Beazley was executed by lethal injection at 6:17 p.m., becoming one of the last juvenile offenders to be executed in the United States. His death marked the end of a legal battle that had lasted 7 years and attracted unprecedented international attention to America's practice of executing individuals for crimes committed as minors. Suzanne Luttig, John's daughter, witnessed the execution along with other family members and law enforcement officials. Their presence represented the lasting impact of Napoleon's crime on the victim's family and their continued support for the death penalty as appropriate punishment for his actions. The international response to Napoleon's execution was swift and condemnatory. European leaders criticized America's decision to proceed with the execution, despite widespread international opposition. The case damaged America's international reputation on human rights issues and provided ammunition for critics of American justice practices. Within 3 years of Napoleon's execution, the legal landscape would change dramatically. In March 2005, the U.S. Supreme Court decided Roper v. Simmons, ruling that the Eighth Amendment prohibited the execution of individuals for crimes committed while under age 18. Napoleon's case had contributed to the growing consensus that ultimately led to this landmark decision. The Roper decision affected 72 juvenile offenders on death rows across America, commuting their sentences to life imprisonment. Had Napoleon's case been decided just 3 years later, he would have been among those whose lives were spared by the court's recognition that evolving standards of decency no longer supported juvenile executions. Napoleon's execution represented the end of an era in American capital punishment. He was among the last 22 individuals executed for crimes committed as juveniles since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1976. His case demonstrated both the finality of execution and the evolving nature of constitutional interpretation. The legacy of Napoleon Beazley's case extends beyond the legal precedents it helped establish. His story continues to be studied in law schools, discussed in death penalty debates, and remembered by those who advocate for juvenile justice reform and the abolition of capital punishment. His case illustrated the complex intersection of crime, punishment, race, age, and international human rights law in America's justice system. The questions raised by his prosecution, conviction, and execution continue to influence debates about appropriate punishment for serious crimes committed by young people. Napoleon Beazley died at age 25 for a crime he committed at age 17, leaving behind a case that would influence American law and continue challenging the nation's approach to juvenile justice long after his execution. If stories like this move you, where justice, youth, and tragedy collide, make sure you subscribe to No Way Out. Here, we break down real cases into every detail, so you can see the truth for yourself. Hit the bell so you never miss an episode, because these are more than just stories. They were the moments that define lives, justice, and the choices that can never be undone.